Hi, Ange. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you so much for doing this. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time for this fireside chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to start off with a question for like the viewers to get to know Mason Dixie Foods like a little bit better. So could you kind of give like a brief background on the company and like what inspired you to start it?
Yeah, so the company actually started out as a restaurant concept. I was trying to build a multi-unit, fast casual, better for you comfort food restaurant, all centered around biscuits because it's iconically American. And I just thought, it was really unfortunate that KFC and Popeyes and Chick-fil-A were representations of American Southern comfort food when it really isn't anything like what it's supposed to be. So started the concept in 2014 and really quickly gained traction just from a grassroots following in Washington, D.C. We had lines wrapped around city blocks. I mean, like 8-hour long lines. And eventually we've just run out of food constantly because we couldn't keep up with demand. So had this idea to start stealing biscuits off of a tray and freezing them. And then worst case scenario, if we ran out of hot food, we could always sell these frozen biscuits to people and they could kind of go on their merry way and have an at-home Mason Dixie experience. And so didn't anticipate it, but a few months after opening our food hall location in this place called Union Market, we were secret shopped by Whole Foods, and we were asked to make our products available for retail. So we launched in our first Whole Foods in the day before Thanksgiving in 2015, and then quickly year over year, more than doubled, tripled in growth. And now we're selling frozen comfort food from frozen biscuits to frozen breakfast sandwiches, all natural, clean label, in over 8,000 locations countrywide.
Wow. I mean, yeah, speaking of gaining traction and like that Whole Foods incident that you were talking about, in fact, like your biscuits ended up selling under 3 hours when I was doing my research. It's just quite insane.
Yeah. We beat butter and milk sales the day before Thanksgiving from a dollar perspective. So that's how everyone started jumping on the gravy train, right?
Yeah. So given kind of like this tremendous demand for your product, what measures have you kind of taken to sustain that growth while building like a larger customer base? So like, in other words, like how have you kind of scaled the company since then to now?
Well, we started making the biscuits on a table that was 4 feet wide, and we ran it in 24-hour shifts. And then when that got too small, we ended up making them out of the back of our restaurant for quite some time. Back then it was a little easier to navigate being kind of innovative with how you get to do things, but today it's highly regulated now. So when we got to the point where we couldn't really store enough, we ended up looking for a co-manufacturer to make our recipe, our formula on a mass scale. So we started out with one manufacturer and now we have over 8. So just with demand and timing and how things have progressed and the types of products that we make, we always look for really good manufacturing partners that have our same values and are willing to make products the way we kind of tell them to make it, right? Like making food natural is not always the easiest, right? Like most biscuits today, people don't realize they're made with shortening and palm oil. So it's highly processed where we use real butter, right? Butter is a very hard thing to break down. So, but we will not compromise. There's been a number of bakeries that are like, you should just use oil. And we say, well, you can just keep walking then. We're not going to do business with you, right? So it's really important to have really firm requirements and how you want your products to be manufactured and then finding those partners that are willing to accommodate that with you.
Yeah, I mean, my next question ties in perfectly to what you mentioned. So given that the US frozen food market is projected to reach about $90.47 billion by 2028, what responsibility do you believe companies in this industry have towards kind of ensuring that preservatives are limited? Because oftentimes it seems like if you limit preservatives, then the cost of the food goes up or like the durability is kind of sacrificed. So do you think we can achieve like that perfect balance without sacrificing the quality?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of research being done today on preservative alternatives, but the challenge is there's just not enough companies stepping up to say that this is important, right? And they're making these accommodations constantly. But I do think that the natural preservation world is at an all-time high in terms of people rediscovering it, right? Like pickling, fermentation, freezing, jarring, canning, all of it, HPP, like there's so many ways now to eliminate the need for preservatives, but it really falls and rests on the responsibility of distribution, right? They're the reason that people have preservatives, because getting product, moving it around creates temperature variations and food safety issues. So everyone fought back to those challenges with preservatives. But what we've found is that freezing, it's not something you can do with everything, right? But freezing is an incredible alternative. And we've experienced a lot of success. We've innovated our own natural chemical leavening systems to kind of make our product last longer in the frozen section without adding preservatives. There's a lot of really interesting work being done right now in the science community. It's really just a matter of, it's only going to get cheaper with scale. So more people have to purchase it and use it. And honestly, it's going to take a big lift from the big 10 consumer product companies to really understand the importance and influence of what consumers really want. The good news is they're really far behind. So smaller companies like us can take advantage of what they're not doing.
Yeah.
The bad news is it's just going to take a long time to change the largest manufacturers that really tip the scale in terms of costs long run.
Got it. So it's more of like a team effort that like every company
has to be.
Happen, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Younger people like you guys are demanding, transparency, and they just can't offer that if they're using all these chemicals. So I think it's going to take a while, but I do think we're already on that trend. Even when we got started, 7 years ago, we went to our first Natural Products Expo trade show. It was full of vitamins, full of powders, full of like what I think is false health promises, right? But today, like the last few weeks ago when we went to the show, it's completely changed. I think there's a lot of stuff now that people are doing to bring back natural foods to market. There's brands now that I've watched and I've been a fan of for 5 years that have now fully scaled, right? And they're changing how things are done. And look at Kodiak Cakes versus Eggo Waffle, right? They're really transforming how people look and purchase. And so I think it's just a matter of time and more energy that smaller brands can really bring to the table, not just big companies.
Yeah, love to see that. My next question is just like, it's kind of more of a personal question of like your experiences as an entrepreneur. How has that kind of changed since you initially started your business and now, like, has that really changed over the years, or do your responsibilities like change, or just kind of like a background?
When I started the company, again, just, the hope was to create a restaurant chain, right? So I was managing restaurant, team members, and the consumer products side was just Ross and I. And now we have a team of almost 30 people and it's still growing. And so your role changes because you're not always doing the same tasks. You're now delegating, you're now thinking about the future more often, right? Not just responding to what's happening right now. And it's also interesting because, as a company, we've hired a lot of incredibly talented senior people. But these are people that would not have been granted the same opportunities had they stayed in big corporate America. Like, we're 80% diverse. So there's literally 7 out of 8 of our executive positions are held by women, right? These are all transformational changes that seem like no-brainers and easy to execute. And they are, but it really takes a mindset of like, now as a founder, now as an entrepreneur, now that we're big enough to play the game, what can we change about the game?
So like, speaking of building like diversity within companies, you're a founder of a company that hires people from all backgrounds and seeks to create an inclusive workplace. What role do you believe diversity and inclusion plays in the success of companies within today's generation?
Great question. So, just less than 60 years ago, 50 years ago, the country was 90% white. Wow. And you fast forward to today, the country is 50, I think it's like 60-40 or 55-45. The numbers are growing where almost half of the country is of color, right? The purchasing power of Americans still is predominantly female, and yet executive product companies are still run by men who don't represent the interests of the female purchasing power women, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of shifts that, as a company, if you want to be future forward, you need to be representative of the consumer, right? If 40% of the consumer base is of color, then your team should be 40% of color, right? They should have a voice in how the company takes shape and how it formulates its ideas and its products and its processes.
Mm-hmm.
And so here, I also think it's important to have leaders who are of color, because if you can't see it, then you can't dream it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to be an inclusive workplace, it's not just hiring a bunch of junior hires that are of color, because their reference point is still some straight white older man who they can't relate to, and they can't see how they're going to shape shift themselves to become that person.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That was such a beautiful answer. Just speaking of like this top-down approach, what ways do you believe that companies can kind of seek proactively source candidates from like underrepresented communities and make them feel like more comfortable applying to such jobs?
Well, first of all, hire managers that are of color and of those backgrounds, right? If you hire a gay person, if you hire a Black woman as a leader, if you hire a woman in general, right? We're still really lacking in female leadership. There's a lot of opportunities because we've seen it. I mean, because we're so majority female, we get a lot of female candidates because women want to work for women, right? It's the same thing with people of color. People follow people of color. They want to work in those environments because they feel they can be comfortable, right? Mm-hmm. So I think every company has a responsibility to start replacing and hiring top talent that is of color or taking the chance. We also, as a company, have a policy of not just hiring based on the resume. Like, I don't care if you have a college degree in certain jobs, right? Some jobs, it's important. But honestly, in business functions, it's really more important about your values, your work ethic, your alignment, your ability to be independent, or just like soft skills, right? Those are more important to me than if you've worked at a biscuit place before. I don't care about that, right? Like, so I think even how people look at hiring has changed a lot, and it needs to be better.
Well said. I was also wondering, like, is there anything you would have done differently looking back at your journey, like when you initially started, or not really?
It's funny. I think, well, first of all, I have a funny quote about failure, right? I don't believe in it. I feel like failure is when you really give up. And it's really hard for people to think, have I really, really given up, right? If you really, really think about, when have you ever given 100% of yourself to and it didn't work out somehow, right? If you didn't, and you truly believe you give 100% of yourself, did you really, right? Because I do believe that pivoting is not failure. Pausing and rethinking a scenario and going another direction, that's not failure, right? A lot of people group that. And so they group all those scenarios into this big F, and it's not, right? So would I have done things differently? Sure, but that just involves me having other resources I didn't have at the time. You make all of your decisions in life based on what's in front of you at that moment, right?
So the last question that I had prepared was, do you have any pieces of advice for aspiring entrepreneurs? Something from like your experiences, what your takeaways were throughout the journey? Yeah.
I mean, I think very frequently, especially as a woman and a woman of color, it's always so easy to hear people give you negative feedback and you think, I can't do this, right? Like, I got so many questions early from venture capital and investors are just like, I'll never forget. In fact, I turned this one investor into an investor. He said no originally because he was like, oh, I really love the restaurant idea. This thing about the frozen biscuits, take it out of the deck. Like, that's just confusing. I don't like it, right? And I was like, that's the thing that's going to really make the company successful, right? Like, in my mind, this is a national marketing opportunity. It gets the brand out there. And I could have said, fine, I'll take it out of the deck. But I didn't. And I kept pushing, right? And in the end, when it came back and I ran into him at a trade show and I said, hey, remember that line you told me to take out of the deck? Yeah, that business is like doing millions of dollars now. And he's like, oh, I want to invest, right? So stick to your guns. Don't take no for an answer. Don't take criticism. Just because somebody prefers something a certain way doesn't mean what you're doing is wrong. Just find the person that likes what you're doing, right? Like, don't second guess your gut intuition. Stick to your guns, but be open to feedback, right? Take every piece of feedback as, what didn't you explain correctly that could have turned them, right? Like, is it a timing issue? Like, really think about why you're getting the constructive feedback that you're getting. Always, don't ever take it personal. Try to grow from it.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of finding that perfect balance between trusting your gut and like also taking other people's advice, right? But sticking to the plan is, yeah.
But it's like 7th grade science class, right? There's a hypothesis and then there's the proof points, right? So your gut is your hypothesis. You got to prove it though. If you can't prove it to yourself, no one's going to believe you, right? So always, it's no different in business. You have to have a hypothesis you're proving out, and you have to do all the hard work to figure out if this is real. And if you can prove that it's real to you, you can prove it to others.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those are all the questions that I had for you, but I really appreciate you taking the time for this chat. And I'll be sure to try out your product someday because I have not tried it out yet, but they look delicious.
Send me your mailing address. We'll send you a bunch of free coupons so you can go and try it out.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll definitely buy some. Awesome. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks so much. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.